Begin. All right, today I'm going to show you my method for sewing reusable and washable cloth pads. This is an example of what we'll be making. We've got one layer of polyurethane laminate on the back, which has a print, and then it's been waterproofed on one side. Towards the skin, you've got a cotton or bamboo velour, very soft, and sandwiched inside we have a terry cloth fabric. Mine's a heavier weight terry cloth because it's what I have on hand. There are other fabrics you can use, fancy fabrics. I don't own any of those, so it's not what I use. I've recycled bath towels for this project. Some people are tempted to put several layers in, and honestly, I find that those are harder to wash and dry effectively. I'd rather just change out the pad more frequently as my body needs. So you decide what works best for you, but these are the basic ingredients to make a cloth pad. All right, so first thing you're gonna need is a pattern. Years and years ago, I traced around an existing pad that was a good size for me. Just traced around the outside and made this template. Then I folded back the wings and traced another template. And this is what you need for the absorbent layer. So the absorbent layer, you do need to cut out from yardage and cut all of those curves. And here I've got a little pile of those going. For the other fabrics, that's super tedious to cut out all of these tight curves, large curves, inside curves from each and every layer and then line them up in such a way that they don't shift on you. I find that to take an extra long amount of time. So instead, I just cut my fabric into large rectangles that are long enough and wide enough to fit my pattern piece, plus about a ½ inch on both sides. And that allows me to line things up a lot nicer and easier. My polyurethane laminate I put on the bottom layer with my print side facing me and my waterproof layer down, so right side facing up. And then I take my velour and I put the soft right side down. So now we're right sides together, and you can see how that's just really easy to line things up. I don't have to be really particular with all those little points, using a bunch of pins, poking a bunch of holes in my polyurethane laminate. Now, one thing I do have to do is I need to know where to stitch. And so I've taken a Sharpie, a fine tip Sharpie, and I've just traced around the outside of my pattern like so. And that's telling me where I'm going to be doing some stitching. I want to keep my layers together, and I don't want to have to use pins to do it. One, because I don't like pins, and two, because I'm using a waterproof layer to begin with. So I use some temporary fabric spray adhesive, such as 505 spray. There's lots of brands out there. This is the one I use. And I just do a quick spritz. You can even put less than that on there. Make sure that if anytime you're spraying 505 spray near any of your sewing tools, that you're paying attention to where that overspray might end up. It's particularly troublesome around sewing machines. So using a cardboard box, having a paper bag handy is a good idea. Once I've put those two layers together, they're gonna stay put for me, and I'm ready to start my sewing. I'm gonna start my sewing on one edge of a wing, and usually I like to start right around here. So at the end of a wing, and I'm gonna start by back stitching a little bit. Ultimately, I'm gonna be leaving a hole on the wing area. And so, so I can flip this right sides out. I'm stitching right on my drawn edge. You have to go slower around those curves to make them around. This can be a challenging first project if you're not comfortable with your sewing machine. These really tight, and it's mainly because of those curves. These tight curves, kind of lifting your presser foot up with your needle down, allows you to pivot in those tighter spaces. But once you get the hang of it, it's not too hard. If you had cut the top and bottom layers exactly to shape, then this whole step would be incredibly more challenging, just because there's a lot to shift. Your velour is stretchy, your polyurethane laminate is stretchy but to a much lesser degree. And so the two things are just trying to shift around on you. So I find the spray adhesive really helps keep things placed together nicely, and then also cutting it into rectangles. Okay, I'm going around the second wing, this tight curve. I'm just going a couple stitches past that, and then I'm back stitching, and that's leaving a section open that's about this big, which is enough for turning my whole thing right side out. Now, once I've stitched around, I do flip it over to double check that I haven't stitched off the edge on any edges. Like I was saying earlier, you want to make sure that you've allowed for about a 1/2 inch wider than your physical pattern, because it just makes it easier for you. But once you've confirmed that, yep, we're good to go, then you kind of cut your excess away. I'm wanting to leave at least about 1/4 inch around the edge of everywhere that I stitched. So this is a little reverse. Usually you cut something to the size you want it to be, and then you stitch inside of that cut line, creating a seam allowance. But in this case, your line is actually, your drawn line is actually your stitch line, and then when you cut, you're leaving a seam allowance. Now, when you flip this right side out, there's going to be, because we have so many curves, it's going to get bunchy at certain spots. So on your outside curves, especially these tight outside curves, I'm just going to snip a bit of that fabric away. Not so far that I cut into my stitching, but enough to take out that excess. And on these inside curves, I'm just going to cut some little clips that go close to but not through my line of stitching. And if you've ever sewn anything curved like this, you'll understand why we're doing it. Everything will just lay nicer because there's some areas that are going to pull and other areas that are going to bunch based off of when you flip this fabric, this whole thing inside out. So that looks pretty good to me. Now I'm able to take that opening, slide my finger in there, and you'll feel a little bit of resistance because we do have that spray adhesive. So good reasons to keep that spray adhesive light. Actually, I'm not supposed to do that quite yet. My next step is, and I'm being dangerous, I'm doing this next to my sewing machine, which I wouldn't normally choose to do, but I'm going to spray again a little bit of spray adhesive here on the pad, and I'm going to place my terry cloth. And it should fit right inside those stitch lines. Now, that is stuck in place, and I am ready to flip the whole thing right side out. Now, this is, I basically slide my finger in there up to the point, using my thumb to kind of push that terry cloth, keep it in them together. It should really hold on decently because you've got that spray adhesive, but I try to help it along a little bit too. Now, when you do this, you may feel like that hole is not sufficient. I'm stretching things out, and honestly, it could be. I have done that before where the hole was just not big enough, but usually it's just fine. Usually you can really jam it through there and it's okay. So I use my finger to kind of, and my thumbs, kind of make sure that everything's laying nice, pushing those edges, especially at the wings, pushing the point of the wing out, and up here at the top, and just kind of go along that that sewn edge, sliding my finger around in there, and then making sure the wings are out. What I end up with is a shape like this. Now you may notice spots that look a little bit off. As you sew more and more of these, you'll find less of those spots, but honestly, our next two stitches really help things just kind of lay nicely, so you don't have to worry about it. So where our opening is, it's going to naturally kind of curl in. You allow it to curl in, and then I'm going to reverse stitch and then forward stitch close to that edge in order to close up that hole. And now that's closed up. Doesn't have to be perfect. And next, I like to switch to a triple zigzag stitch and start at the back of my pad, which is pretty thick. So you gotta have to wiggle it in there. So I'm about 1 inch to 1.5 inches from the end, and I'm right centered I'm going to go in reverse first, and then I'm going to move forward. Now, why are we doing this step? Well, we're doing this step for a couple of reasons. I really want everything to lay nicely. And remember that terry cloth is not secured in any way. If we would have cut it larger and caught it in that first stitching, then we would have a really distinct ridge all the way around the outside. And that's just uncomfortable and messy. And then go in reverse when I'm about 1 inch from the end. Slide it out. All right, now I'm going to do the second channel. I'm going to come in on one side of my original stitching, come in a little farther, so I'm more like 2 inches from the edge, centered between my edge of my pad and my stitch line. I'm going to start in reverse, not go back quite as far, although that's not important, that's just a design preference. If anything is feeling bunchy, because these are stretch fabrics, you can kind of give them just a little tug to the sides to make sure everything's laying nice and flat. I just continue about equal distance from that original stitch line, and then I start curving out as I get to the end of the front of my pad, and then I go in reverse. Now these kind of where I put these stitch lines, how many stitch lines, and what shape where they start and stop, that is completely a style preference. This is just how I like to do them. So yeah, not only does this stitching keep that terry cloth inside in place, wash after wash after wash. My current stash I've been using for 17 years without any problems. They're starting to get a little tattered around the edges, and that's why I needed to sew some more. But it also just kind of creates some channels, and they also makes it just a little bit thinner, I guess, which makes it more comfortable. All these punctures through the polyurethane laminate does have the potential to create spots where, if worn for too long, it can create leaks. But I prefer my pads to be a little bit thinner so that they wash and dry really efficiently. So here's what I've created. See how these kind of curved out and don't go quite as far because it's not necessary. The middle one's kind of the longest, both at the bottom and at the top, but whatever style you decide to do is fine. This is what it looks like on the other side. But now wash after wash after wash, everything will kind of stay put and they'll always look nice. I'm going to add snaps to either side, and then your pad is done.
Start.
All right, this is my industrial snap press. It installs nylon snaps, which is what I like to use for my pads. I've already installed one with the cap on one side and the male snap on the other side, and I'm ready to install my other snap. So if I've got a cap on one side, then on the other wing the cap has to be on the reverse side in order for everything to line up properly. I don't need to reinforce these wings at all because polyurethane laminate plus a layer of velour is strong enough. That's how you install the snap. Make sure they work. Everybody's attached well. Now they should be able to wash and dry many times without any problems. Now, not everyone has an industrial press, so you probably are going to use some metal snaps or something that you already have on hand. Whatever you have should work just fine. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. Happy sewing.